The British justice system is the envy of the world. But in the past, mistakes have been made.
Between the year 1900 and the year 1964, approximately 800 people were hanged in the United Kingdom. Many of those desperately protested their innocence.
Some of these long-standing convictions could be a miscarriage of justice.
She's been assaulted with a weapon, and there's been more than one blow.
In this series, a living relative will attempt to clear their family name.
I think this was an unsafe conviction.
Searching for new evidence.
There's no forensic evidence to link particularly to him, no.
With help from two of the UK's leading barristers, one for the defence.
There is a world of difference between an unpleasant journey and murder.
And one for the prosecution.
He cut off her head, dismembered her, and buried her in a place where he hoped she would never be found.
They're on a mission to solve a mystery, submitting their findings to a Crown Court judge.
Your Honour ought to declare the conviction for murder to be unsafe.
Thank you both for your submissions. I shall consider these matters for myself.
Can this modern investigation rewrite history? On a February evening in 1918, a teenage girl was on her way home from a library in southeast London. 16-year-old Nellie True was attacked by a man and dragged into undergrowth next to a pond on Eltham Common. The following morning, Nellie's lifeless body was discovered. She'd been raped and strangled to death. Near her body, two crucial pieces of evidence were recovered: a coat button and a distinctive military badge. Using these items, police put out an appeal. And suspicion soon fell on an ex-serviceman who lived only 70 yards from the murder scene. 21-year-old David Greenwood. Despite professing his innocence, Greenwood was convicted of the teenager's murder and sentenced to death.
So, Kath, this is David at about the time of his arrest.
And he looks so young here.
Now, just over a century later, David Greenwood's relative Catherine is on a mission to clear his name. She only found out about the case a few years ago.
At first, you believe that it's true, and it's really quite shocking. But once the question marks started, I looked into it more and more and doubted that justice had been done.
Catherine and her cousin John, who has flown in from Australia, have been researching the case together.
And of course, David came from this broader family here, and his mum and our respective great-grandparents all together in the same shot.
I think David Greenwood is innocent. I would like to find out more about the case and find out once and for all whether he really is innocent or not.
David Greenwood denied carrying out this heinous, sexually motivated crime. But was it a miscarriage of justice? And can a modern-day legal team shed any fresh light on a century-old conviction? Jeremy Dean QC has over 3 decades' experience as one of the country's most prominent defence barristers. Examining the case for the prosecution is Sasha Wass QC, who was made the UK's Criminal Silk of the Year in 2015. Catherine has travelled to London to meet the barristers.
Hi there, Catherine. Sasha.
Hello.
This is
Nice
Jeremy.
to meet you, Jeremy.
Hello. So, tell us how you first heard about this case.
I was doing some internet searching on my family, and a cousin of mine, John Bland, got in touch with me, and somebody got in touch with him by email and told us about this case, so this was completely out of the blue. We just both simultaneously started looking into it together, and the more we delved, the more we felt that this case just seemed to have so many things that didn't add up.
So tell me what troubles you most, then.
It all seems to be circumstantial evidence, and the other thing is that it was supposed to be a brutal attack, but David Greenwood had been in the army and he'd been discharged from that around about 6 months beforehand on the grounds of ill health, so he wasn't even fit enough to have conducted this murder.
Sometimes in a situation like this, it emerges that the case was actually stronger than people at first thought. And if that was to occur, how would you feel about that?
I think I'll be devastated. I'm very entrenched in the view that I think this was an unsafe conviction.
We're going to go away and look at it, and we hope to have some news for you in due course. But very nice to meet you.
Yes.
It's been a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you very much.
David Greenwood was born in 1896 in Newcastle upon Tyne and moved with his family to London when he was around 5. At the outbreak of World War I, Greenwood enlisted underage and soon found himself on the front line in France, serving as a field medic attached to the Leicestershire Regiment. After 3 years of service, he was medically discharged in 1917 and returned to live with his family in southeast London. But did this distinguished veteran, with no previous criminal record, rape and murder Nellie True?
Well, Jeremy, on the 10th of February 1918, the body of a 16-year-old girl, Nellie True, was found on Eltham Common. She had been seriously sexually assaulted and murdered. David Greenwood accepted that he had a badge identical to the one found next to Nellie's body. And on the day of the murder itself, David Greenwood sold that badge, he said, to an unknown man he'd met on a tram, whose only identifying feature was that he had a Belfast accent. He was questioned by detectives who noticed that the buttons on his coat were all missing.
Okay.
He also maintained to the police that he was not at Eltham Common, had never seen Nellie. He put forward a defensive alibi. So, an interesting case.
There appear to be a number of important issues. Firstly, we need to look at the unsecured crime scene.
Yes.
There's also an important issue for us to consider as to David Greenwood's ability to commit this crime, bearing in mind that he'd been discharged from the army the previous year with physical and mental ailments. In the end, the case very substantially revolved around the finding of the badge and the button. Whether that was sufficient is something we need to consider.
Nellie True had worked as a junior clerk at the Royal Arsenal in Woolwich. She'd lived with her parents on the same housing estate as David Greenwood, beside Eltham Common. John and Catherine have come to the scene of Nellie's murder to better understand the events that unfolded that terrible night. On the evening of the 9th of February 1918, Nellie had been at the library in nearby Plumstead. It's believed she may have taken the tram, alighting by Eltham Common to walk the short distance home. It's here that she was attacked, raped, and then strangled to death.
This whole area is quite wild. This is where possibly she would have been dragged, so it's a very confronting scene. It's a wild place.
Nellie's body was discovered the following morning. By the time the police arrived, there was a large group of bystanders.
The body was found here, and there was a pond, so that was probably around there. And you can see there's trees around it.
Yeah, and although it's quite a busy road down here, you're just far enough away to feel quite remote here. This area, it's very sad.
We want justice for David Greenwood, but we also would like to think that justice had been done for her.
Yes, absolutely.
As well, because her family went through a lot as well.
A number of items were collected as evidence from the crime scene, including the button and the badge that became so central to the case.
I think these were very common items. I mean, everybody must have had buttons like that.
It's quite odd to see the actual items here standing in this area where they were actually found.
Up to now, I've only read about all the case, and I've thought about it, I've imagined it. Actually being here does feel rather sad, just because I know what's happened. The poor girl who had this savage attack.
It was a terrible murder that was committed, and I think we always got to remember that. And obviously we need never forget the victim, and it was a terrible crime, and we need to make sure that there wasn't a miscarriage of justice, because that would just have compounded the problem.
The original button and badge recovered at the murder scene are today held at New Scotland Yard's Crime Museum. Given their pivotal importance to David Greenwood's case, the barristers have asked forensic scientist Dr. Jen Guest to examine these crucial artefacts.
I think it'd be interesting to take back to the barristers the condition of the items. So it'd be really interesting if they can have a look at the case papers and find out what condition they were in when they were found. Were they as clean as this, which would suggest they hadn't been there very long. And I'd be interested to show them the button and the wire, and that really there's nothing specifically about this button that would link it to a particular item of clothing. We've got no fabric, for example, that we could be using as a fit back to a piece of clothing.
Police arranged for photos of the button and badge to appear in newspapers, where they were spotted by David Greenwood's workmates. At their suggestion, Greenwood went to the police station voluntarily in the hope of ruling himself out of their inquiries. However, he became a prime suspect when Chief Inspector Francis Carlin noticed that all the buttons on his overcoat were missing. In order to find out how the police investigation gathered pace, John and Catherine have come to Eltham Library.
So this is a book written by Francis Carling. It says, on the strength of the case which I had built out of the badge and the button, I knew that he had indeed murdered Nellie True, and I saw that there was no possible alibi which could be put up to show that he was wrongly accused. So he had already decided, before the court case or anything else had happened, that David Greenwood was guilty. He then gave up on looking for anybody else.
So in David's statement, he says, whilst I was on the tram I got on at Westmount Road, a man asked me what badge it was I had on my coat. I told the man it was a Leicester Regiment collar badge. He asked me if I would sell it, as he had a son in the Leicesters. I told him I'd rather not, as I might have trouble getting another. He said, well, I'll give you a couple of bob for it. So I sold it to him.
Perhaps this is the only thing that is a little bit of a question mark, isn't it? That he happened to have the badge on that day and sold it on that particular day and didn't have it later on.
It does seem quite a coincidence.
Did David Greenwood really sell his regimental badge to a mysterious individual on the very night of Nellie's murder? What's not disputed is that a badge exactly like the one he had owned was recovered from the crime scene.
See, the body was here.
Along with an overcoat button. Dr. Jen Guest has brought her photos of these items from the Crime Museum to show the barristers, who want to scrutinise how the crime scene was managed by police of the day.
So, Jen, what we can gather from records that were kept at the time was that when the police first arrived, there were about 11 members of the public around the body. But in fact, during the next hour or so, that number increased to about 30. So not ideal.
No, not ideal, particularly because we've got some exhibits quite spread out here between the road and the body, so you really need to protect that area and keep it clear from the public. In fact, the button itself is found by a member of the public later on in the investigation.
It's pure speculation to conclude that the button got there at around the time Nellie True was murdered.
Yes, we couldn't say that. You'd just have to keep the button aside and look for additional evidence to support that button arriving there or being associated with the crime itself.
The same goes for the badge, doesn't it?
Yes, the badge is slightly different, I think, because it's found earlier on by a member of the police rather than a member of the public, and it's found in an area where a lot of Nellie True's items were found.
It's not possible to conclude anything about how long that button had been in situ, is it?
Well, what struck me when I was looking at it at the Crime Museum was the wire itself, because the wire now, it's a long time past, looked quite tarnished, but I would have been really interested to know what it looked like at the time, because the cleaner, the brighter that wire was, and then potentially the more recently broken it looked, the more interested I would have been in the button.
So we have the evidence, Jen, of James Henry Green, who was a storekeeper, who said that he saw a man pick up a black bone overcoat button. It was wired at the back, as indeed that is. The wire was bright, as if it had lately come off.
Ah, interesting. OK.
Nothing you've been able to tell us assists in the conclusion that it was in fact David Greenwood who was responsible for this crime. Would you agree?
There's no forensic evidence to link particularly to him, no.
Jeremy has particular concerns about the fact that the button was handed to the police by a member of the public.
Who was that member of the public? In what circumstances was the button handed over? How can it be established that that button was there at the time of Nellie True's killing or shortly afterwards, when the scene wasn't secured for so many hours afterwards? So these are important issues to be considered.
David Greenwood's trial began at the Old Bailey in central London on the 24th of April 1918. Central to his defence was that he could not have committed the attack on Nellie, as he'd been elsewhere at the time, and there were witnesses to corroborate his claims. Sasha and Jeremy are going back through David's movements that night to see if he had a solid alibi.
Sasha, this is a map of southeast London in the year 1918. It's in this area that both David Greenwood and Nellie True lived. And it's just around here that the incident, in the course of which he was killed, took place.
And in fact, Jeremy, what Mary Greenwood, his mother, said in evidence, and this is really the critical part of her evidence, she says he was back home by 7 o'clock.
It's believed that Nellie True was making her way back to this area between 8 and 9 p.m. If Mary Greenwood was correct, David Greenwood did have a cast-iron alibi for the killing of Nellie True.
But was David Greenwood's alibi as strong as it appeared?
Police evidence which was not contradicted was that the back door of his house would have enabled him to leave the house, do whatever he did with Nellie True, and return, probably unnoticed by his family, who may have given him what they considered to be a genuine alibi.
John and Catherine have come to the Old Bailey, where David Greenwood's trial took place, to meet with barrister and historian Andrew Rose, who's written about the case.
So this is where it all happened. And it says up there, defend the children of the poor, and I'm afraid poor David was one of the children who wasn't well served by the system. One of the particular problems David faced was really his poverty. Family and friends had to scratch around for legal representation, and as a result, I feel that there was the defence was conducted in a rather lacklustre way.
The prosecuting counsel was quite an experienced.
Prosecuting counsel was very experienced. Travis Humphreys, he'd appeared in the Oscar Wilde trial and became a well-known judge in later years. And although he was a very, by the sounds of the day, a fair prosecutor, he was a formidable one as well.
And David was a guy, until that time, who had no, what we call, form. Until then, he had an unblemished record in terms of his
This is the most,
character.
I think, one of the most extraordinary features of this case. This was a terrible crime, worse than the book. David had no previous convictions. More than that, he was of high character. He'd joined up underage. He'd been in the Royal Army Medical Corps, which was one of the bravest of the brave. They had a very high casualty rate, and he was at the Western Front for a year and a half, and he was honourably discharged and left with a perfectly good character. I've investigated a lot of cases from the pre-war years, but of them, this is really the one that sticks out the most as a miscarriage of justice. So I'm personally committed. I feel very strongly that there's an awful miscarriage.
Speaking to Andrew just makes me think that we need to be even more determined now to get justice for David Greenwood.
After suffering injury and ill health during World War I, David Greenwood was medically discharged in 1917. The state of his health was discussed at trial, and whether he would have had the capacity to carry out such a sustained and violent assault. The barristers want a modern-day perspective on David Greenwood's diagnosis. So are meeting forensic psychiatrist and defence mental health expert, Professor Neil Greenberg.
So, Neil, you have David Greenwood's medical records. Can you tell us what is written on those records in terms of the reason for his discharge?
Yes, so at discharge, there were two conditions that seemed to have led to his disability. One was called disordered action of the heart, and the other was called neurasthenia.
So what is neurasthenia?
It's very commonly referred to as chronic fatigue syndrome, which I think many people are perhaps more familiar with.
Yes.
And it's a condition which in which someone is persistently tired for more than 6 months.
Yes.
It doesn't recover with rest.
Right.
And they have a range of other symptoms, such as poor memory, poor concentration, disturbed sleep.
The allegation against David Greenwood, which the jury accepted, was that he'd launched a truly violent and brutal attack on Nellie True. Is it possible that neurasthenia might have made it more difficult for someone like him to perpetrate such a violent attack than otherwise?
I think, on the balance of probabilities, I think it would have played very little part in whether he could or could not have committed this crime.
So essentially, Neil, there is nothing either physically or psychologically in David Greenwood's records that would have prevented him from conducting the attack that he was convicted of.
Indeed. But there's also nothing in the records I've seen that suggests that he's a man who's particularly prone to violence towards others or sexual assaults. But sometimes it's not explicable why these things happen.
Yeah.
Thank you, that's been extremely interesting.
Absolutely.
Very
Thank
nice
you.
to-
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
So David Greenwood may have been physically capable of murdering Nellie True, and he confessed to owning a badge exactly like the one found near her body. But did he ever admit a connection to the button also found at the crime scene? The two police officers who witnessed his statement on the day he first went to the police station were Chief Inspector Francis Carlin and Divisional Detective William Brown.
And what the officer, Chief Inspector Carling, says in his notes, just as he had finished making the statement, he noticed the badge and the button lying on my desk. He took up the button and said, "If I say that is my button, what will it mean to me?" I said, "I cannot tell you." He then said, "Well, I won't say anything."
Well, Sasha, that stands out as being classic old-fashioned verbaling by the police. That is to say, fabrication of comments attributed to the accused. And that's exactly what David Greenwood said at his trial. When it was put to him that he'd made that comment, he said, "I didn't say anything of that sort. I didn't say a word. If I said anything, it should have been written down in the statement." Sasha, in my view, the way in which the trial judge, Mr. Justice Atkin, dealt with what I've called police verbals was wholly unacceptable, indeed outrageous. What the judge did was to talk about this being a very serious matter and how the prosecution evidence was, quote, sworn to by two inspectors of police. And then he went on to say this: "Now, they are men who have attained almost as high a position in the police detective force as they could expect to attain. Men of age and experience, and they both say this was said. They are not young men who would be likely to be consumed with a zeal for securing some sort of evidence and therefore likely to put it in. And there's no doubt that if they have invented, they have both of them be guilty of about as serious an offence as anybody ever could commit. Very nearly conspiracy to murder." I mean, astonishing thing for a trial judge to say. And then the judge goes on to say that if David Greenwood had falsely denied the comment attributed to him, well, what would that say about David Greenwood? The mischief behind these comments by the judge is that they show the judge to be utterly biased in favour of the prosecution.
On the 26th of April 1918, the jury delivered their verdict that David Greenwood was guilty. He was sentenced to death and immediately transferred to Wandsworth Prison to await his execution. John and Catherine have come to the prison to meet Stuart McLaughlin, who's taking them to the site of the former condemned cell where Greenwood was incarcerated. Here, just a day before he was due to hang, there was an astonishing development. King George V had issued a reprieve on the advice of the Home Secretary. Greenwood would no longer be executed, and his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment.
Now, David actually writes up how he felt when he got the news of his reprieve in Thompson's. You might want to take a read of it.
One evening, about 8 o'clock at night, the chief warder came to see me in the cell
Greenwood, I have some news for you. Oh, yes, my invariable reply. Oh, it's good news, he went on. I shrugged my shoulders. That all depends on what you call good news. What is it? Well, the Home Secretary has advised His Majesty to grant a reprieve. Here in the news, the bluff old kind-hearted warder slapped me on the shoulder. Well, my lad, what do you think of that? I felt depressed. Oh, it's no good, I said. Take it away. The head warder looked amazed. You don't seem pleased, he said. I shook my head. No, I replied, I'm not pleased. Get on with the other business. It's no good to me. He tried to smile encouragement at me. Some warders are very humane. I was very sorry the reprieve had been granted.
At that point, I think he'd probably resigned himself to what was going to happen, and that might have felt like easier than serving a sentence.
The reprieve or the conditional pardon document signed by the King was an important document. It was something that obviously was a very important part of the process. And, you know, it seems to also sort of underline the sense of doubt that there was about the conviction.
Catherine and John have arranged a special meeting with David Greenwood's great nieces.
Hello, nice to meet you. Hello.
Abby,
John.
Anne,
Hello. Lovely to meet you.
and Sue.
Lovely to meet you. Hello. When did you find out about David Greenwood in this case?
Well, I found out a few years ago when another cousin came to visit my mum and I when I was visiting my mum. And she said about Uncle David and that he had gone to prison for murder. And she came out with it quite matter-of-factly, and my mum was so shocked. And she said, no, not my Uncle David. He was a lovely man.
And I guess on that emotional side with David being in prison, his family would have been really upset knowing that he was innocent and knowing what kind of person he was. So this is a letter that David wrote while he was in prison and sent to his mother and sister Eleanor on the 9th of February 1924. Dear sister, the fact of the matter is I am absolutely in the depths. I am sick at heart and I feel that the soul is being crushed, or I rather say frozen out of me. I have lost faith in my fellow men, fellow human beings. It's really sad, isn't it?
Sad. It is.
With Judgment Day fast approaching, Jeremy has come across some crucial information about an alternative suspect who emerged whilst David Greenwood was in prison. He's found some reports from a psychiatric nurse called Marguerite Sinclair Kent concerning a man in her care called Albert Lytton, who confessed to the sexually motivated attack on Nellie True.
Miss Kent pointed out in her reports that in November 1920, after attending church, Lytton burst into tears. She goes on to describe how he confessed to the murder of Nellie True. And he said he'd walked over Elton Common with her and then we had a cuddle. We never knew when we might have to join up, so we got all the love we could. Then he said he didn't remember what had happened, except that she screamed. The Home Office initially appeared to take the matter seriously, but the officer who was in charge of the investigation of Lytton's confession was Chief Inspector Brown, who happened to be one of the team who'd been involved in the conviction of David Greenwood. And so it was that Brown dismissed Lytton's confession.
We must remember that Albert Lytton had been certified insane at the time of making this confession. We must remember that all of the details that he gave about the venue and the time, etc., had been given a huge amount of publicity. And in fact, he added detail which turned out to be wrong.
In Albert Lytton's case, he lived and worked in the right area. He had a breakdown in early April 1918, so not very long after the killing of Nellie True.
I think what causes me concern, and what is possibly the decisive factor, is that Albert Lytton had no connection whatsoever with that regimental badge that was found amongst Nellie's property. It was that badge that was really one of the most critical pieces of evidence in the case. And finally, Lytton himself retracted that confession at a later date.
Having been incarcerated in 1918 at the age of 21, in 1933, David Greenwood was finally released on licence, having served a 15-year sentence. John and Catherine have come to the house in Orpington in Kent, where Greenwood spent his final years until his death in 1978, aged 81. Despite no longer being in prison, how free was he, living with the stigma of his conviction for the brutal murder of Nellie True?
There's an article here where David talks about his experience, and he says, he closes with the words, "Vengeance is not mine, it is in other hands. Since coming out into the world, I have met with such kindness from my fellow creatures and have felt such happiness at being free and alive that my only wish is to do the best I can for the present and to hope to achieve something even greater in the future."
I think being here does bring a sense of closure.
It's obviously a very peaceful location and a very pleasant location, in stark contrast to earlier parts of David's life, but it's hopefully an indication of the peace he found later in life.
I still think he's innocent, and I still think that it was unjust. And if he was innocent, I still think that Nellie True's family didn't get justice either.
Sasha and Jeremy have completed their investigation and must now put their submissions to Judge David Radford.
Summing up is an absolutely crucial part of the criminal justice process, and I'll be examining before Judge Radford today whether the judge took a decision to make remarks in that summing up which rendered David Greenwood's conviction fundamentally unsafe.
For Catherine, today marks the culmination of years of research into David Greenwood's case and could finally be the opportunity to clear his name.
Catherine, hello. Nice to see you.
Hello, nice
Hello,
to see
Catherine.
you.
Good to see you.
So how are you feeling today? A bit nervous?
I'm feeling a bit nerve-wracked.
Well, that's normal. That's normal because obviously it's a big day for you. What are you hoping for?
What I'm hoping to find out is that, having looked at evidence and the information that you've looked at, that you find that this perhaps was a wrongful conviction.
Well, the proceedings are about to start, so we're going to get into the room and get our papers ready, all right?
OK.
All right. Let's hope it goes well.
Thank you.
Sasha and Jeremy must now present their arguments to Senior Crown Court Judge David Radford.
We are here today so that I can consider, with the assistance of learned counsel, the conviction of David Greenwood for murder in 1918. Mr. Dean, would you like to start?
Your Honour, on the morning of the 10th of February 1918, the body of 16-year-old Nellie True was found on Eltham Common. As against David Greenwood, there were two crucial pieces of evidence, said the prosecution, being a freshly detached coat button and a military badge, both of which were found at the scene and both of which were said to be linked to Mr. Greenwood. And his case at trial was that he was not present at the scene of the crime. I mentioned by way of background here the assistance given to us by Dr. Jen Guest, a modern-day forensic scientist, who assisted by expressing the view that the crime scene in this case presented real challenges. Anybody could have deposited the button and the badge at the crime scene over a number of hours. Your Honour, I now come to the central point which has been discovered in the course of this investigation of Mr. Greenwood's conviction. It is a point which is new. It was not a matter argued at Mr. Greenwood's appeal, and it relates to comments made by the trial judge in the course of his summing up. Your Honour will see that the passage begins as follows. Now, gentlemen, the judge here addressing the jury, the other point that is relied upon and to which I think your attention ought to be very seriously directed, says the judge, is the question of the evidence given by Inspector Brown and Inspector Carlin. With the button on the table, Mr. Greenwood is alleged to have asked the officers, quote, "If I say it is my button, what will it mean?" Police claim that Mr. Carling, one of the officers, then said, quote, "I cannot answer that." To which Mr. Greenwood is alleged to have said, "Well, I won't say anything." And now I deal with the judge's unacceptable comments, which in my submission made a fair trial impossible. The judge said, now you must come to a conclusion, first of all, as to whether he said it or not. And upon that arises a very serious matter, because this is sworn to by two inspectors of police. Now, they are men who've attained almost as high a position in the police detective force as they could expect to attain. Men of age and experience, they both say this was said. So here the judge is giving the officers a glowing character tribute. So the judge has, in my submission, first effectively told the jury that what Mr. Greenwood is alleged to have said almost has to be true, because two such eminent police officers would have no reason to lie about it. But then he goes on, in effect, to direct the jury that for these officers to have conspired to pretend that Mr. Greenwood made an incriminating statement would be a crime almost as serious as conspiracy to murder. That observation, which is not just factually spurious and wholly without foundation, was so charged with emotion and prejudice, as I submit, to make it impossible for the jury to distance themselves from the judge's approach. So, in conclusion, it's my submission on behalf of Mr. Greenwood that Your Honour ought to regard and declare Mr. Greenwood's conviction for murder to be unsafe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dean. Miss Was.
David Greenwood relied at trial on a defence of alibi, and his mother and relations indicated that he had been at the Greenwood family home at the time when the murder was likely to have taken place. That defence, which was heard and must have been rejected by the jury, is emasculated when one considers that the back door of the house led directly to Eltham Common, and that back door was 70 yards from where Nellie True's body was found. Mr. Greenwood was encouraged by his colleagues to go to the police. The first thing he said to the police was, "Yes, it's my badge." Evidence called by the prosecution at trial indicated that he wore his regimental badge with pride, and it signalled to others that he, Greenwood, had participated in the war. And of course, the war was still ongoing in February 1918. With that background, the suggestion that David Greenwood would be tempted to sell his regimental badge following a chance meeting on a tram with a man he was unable to name or identify, within hours of that regimental badge being found by the slaughtered body of Nellie True, that account is wholly unworthy of belief. David Greenwood's colleagues were also able to say that Mr. Greenwood wore his coat with the buttons always done up. By the 14th of February 1918, when Mr. Greenwood attended the police station, police noticed that the buttons of that coat were missing. I accept wholly what Mr. Dean has said in relation to the judge's direction about the interchange between the officer and Mr. Greenwood about the ownership of the button. That part of the summing up was extremely unfortunate, but it made no difference in effect. The button evidence was strong, the badge evidence was strong. And for all those reasons, the prosecution maintained this was an extremely strong circumstantial case.
Thank you, Ms. Voss. I'm grateful for your submissions and for those from you, Mr. Dean. I shall now take some time to review my conclusions. Would you be good enough to leave me?
Thank you. Catherine, what are your feelings? Are you left with the feeling that he didn't have a fair trial?
The trial itself definitely is unfair if you have a judge that is influencing the jury to that extent.
The judge is now considering all the issues, so for the time being we just have to wait and see how things develop.
Did David Greenwood sexually assault and murder Nellie True more than 100 years ago? Or was he the victim of a rushed police investigation and an unfortunate set of circumstances? The judge is now ready to deliver his verdict.
In my view, the trial jury in Mr. Greenwood's case were fully entitled to place real weight on the finding of the Leicestershire badge. I am not surprised that they must have found the defendant's explanation that he had sold such a prized possession as the Leicestershire badge to an unidentified and never found stranger utterly incredible. I agree with Mr. Dean that the comments made by the judge to the jury should not have been made. However, the comments on this point were not, in my view, central to the main issues in the trial. I have considered all the material put before me, and I find nothing unsafe about the verdict that they returned. I'm grateful. I shall rise now.
Well, Catherine, what's your response to that?
Well, I'm obviously very disappointed. It's not what I thought that you would have concluded, given the case that you made.
Hopefully you found the process that we've been in together useful, and you still feel that it's been of benefit.
Yes. I don't know how I'm going to break this to my family, because I've been so sure, and I've probably led them to believe what I believe. And I was wrong.